Looking back now, it's hard to believe there ever was a time when the standard high-rise was so universally beloved and in its prime. The century of the high-rise. The whole trend started with apartments like the luxurious Dakota building. It set an example for the middle class to also desire vertical living. By mid-century, the state-funded high-rise was an iconic emblem of the period. As one of the most commonly built forms of the century, numerous and myriad. A blunt instrument in the century-long struggle to find a place less obscure for those in the middle, somewhere between the rich and the poor. How did the publicly subsidized high-rise building go then, from solving the problems of the 20th century to being blamed for them? The invention of reinforced concrete was the first ingredient. Its early residential use on a Japanese island is expedient. Mitsubishi builds these tower blocks for workers mining coal under the sea. Concrete fends off typhoons, but living conditions here are not new. They're horrific to the nth degree. Meanwhile, the architect Le Corbusier envisions a more utopic use for concrete. He invents towers in the park, a design which would help the high-rise formula reach its peak. It takes a third invention to make the high-rise truly contagious: public housing, a new idea for this century. It's courageous. It happens first in socialist Red Vienna at a mass scale, while in the US the approach is more cautious under the Great Depression's veil. Mayor LaGuardia builds the first houses with New Deal money to progress, but proves that public housing is possible even in the chief capital of capitalist US. Master builder Robert Moses quickly gets to work. The war is over. The global population booms. And for the next 2 decades, the mass housing experiment blooms. Governments around the globe become committed to social equity, with efforts ranging from full public ownership to public-private affinity. The Soviets call it housing for the new man. The capitalists call it a middle-income housing plan. The New York City Housing Authority becomes home to 5% of the city's population. Britain's 4 million public sector dwellings add to this mass housing equation, rivaling the Soviet bloc, where Khrushchev's uniform prefab concrete slabs expand through multiplication. From Russia to Germany to Mongolia, 60 million people today still live in this high-rise cornucopia. Publicly sponsored housing isn't everywhere the diet. Beyond Europe, North America, and the Soviet Union, high-rise development is rampantly private, except for Singapore, Hong Kong, and isolated experiments, such as Tlatelolco in Mexico City, with ancient Aztec inheritance. The mass housing experiment is a decades-long story of idealism and destruction. Robert Moses's urban renewal obliterates neighborhoods and boosts the crime and segregation it claims to put in reduction. It leaves an often brutal legacy. Take the Bronx air rights building over yards of rail, or the bridge towers over a highway. The noise, the fumes, such an epic fail. At Ronan Point in the UK, a prefab building is so shoddily built it comes down on itself, taking with it 5 lives. The high-rise honeymoon is ending. What survives? Alongside the vertical housing movement, a conflicting phenomenon, urban sprawl, has matured. The white middle class flees downtown on the highways planners such as Robert Moses secured. Now many high-rise neighborhoods, instead of housing this idealized middle class, have become warehouses for the racialized poor, neglected by the state en masse. The buildings fall apart from mismanagement, crime, corruption, and abandonment. Some communities fight back. Now, blaming the buildings for the social failures becomes the new credo. The demolitions begin here with the once admired St. Louis's Pruitt Eco. Down comes the concrete Berlin Wall, with it the Soviet Union and its mass housing construction sprawl. Yet in Singapore and Hong Kong, state-sponsored housing mounts. It's the Shangri-La of mass housing by some experts' accounts. On a global scale, it's a dawning of a new millennial age. Towers made of glass rise, and with them, another ideology takes center stage. Housing is no longer built as a tool for social equity and equilibrium. It's now a financial instrument of market capitalism. They call it the condominium.